right, guys, welcome to our second little week here. And this week we're going to be talking about world regional geography, Europe and Russia. And so some important things are there are 44 countries in Europe, ranging in size from the largest being, of course, Russia, which is nearly double the size of any other country in Europe. And so which would be Germany would be the next biggest, UK, France, Italy, Switzerland, Austria, all the way down to the smallest, which would be like San Marino and Vatican City, Luxembourg, places like that. So Europe is an interesting one. Physically speaking, it's characterized by a diverse range of landscapes, from expansive plains to towering mountain ranges and pristine coastlines to some of the most beautiful rivers in the world. Highly navigable, lots of boat cruises and things like that across many of them. So it's a very diverse place, physically speaking. The continent is situated in the western part of the Eurasian landmass. It boasts a wealth of physical features that have shaped both history and culture and the environment. One prominent feature is the giant European plain, stretching from France to Russia, this area in here. This fertile lowland encompasses many major agricultural regions and supports lots of people. So very densely populated areas. To the east of the Ural Mountains, which act as a natural boundary between Europe and Asia. And other notable ranges include the Alps down here, the border of Italy. They provide, world-renowned skiing and places like that. The Pyrenees, which are located between Spain and France, which are a very natural barrier. And the Carpathian mountains here, they go through like Slovakia and Romania. You can also talk about the Caucasus Mountains over in southern Russia, between the Caspian and Black Seas. So Europe is a northern continent. All the British Islands, for example, fall above the 50th parallel. If we compare Europe's position on a globe with that of the United States, we see that much of Europe lies north of the United States. Paris, France is at about the same latitude as Fargo, North Dakota. Athens, Greece is about St. Louis, Missouri. Its northern position affects its growing seasons, people's moods. It should be taken into consideration, as it is an important influence in the evolution of the European character. It is also surrounded by bodies of water. The Atlantic Ocean borders Europe to the west, the Arctic Ocean to the north, and many seas surround the various peninsulas and coastal regions. There are four main landforms when we talk about Europe. There's the Alpine region, which is in Central Europe, and it includes the Alps, which is one of the world's most renowned mountain ranges. Excuse me. I don't have enough air. Hold on, let me turn off the fan. Just a second. Okay. Sorry. Let's see. The Central Uplands are known also as the Central Plateau. They're located in Western Europe. It comprises of a diverse range of rolling hills and some plateaus, small mountain ranges. The Central Uplands exhibit a mix of agricultural land. There's some forests, lots of historic towns. which contribute both to the natural diversity and the cultural diversity of the region. You then have the northern lowlands, which extend across the northern part of Europe. It covers countries like the Netherlands and Denmark, Germany, Poland. These are characterized by flat or gently rolling terrain. It has very fertile soils, extensive agricultural activities. It includes large river valleys like the Rhine, the Elbe, Oder, as well as extensive wetland areas such as the Wadden Sea. And then you have what we call the Western Highlands, which are found in, well, the western part, hence the name, of the British Isles. In particular, it encompasses mountain areas of Scotland and Wales, parts of Ireland. It consists of these very rugged, elevated areas and peaks, including the Scottish Highlands and the Wicklow Mountains in Ireland, which feature dramatic landscapes, deep lochs, and moorland habitats. Let's see here. Europe is often referred to as the peninsula of peninsulas due to its, well, abundance of peninsulas. Oh, excuse me, abundance of peninsulas. They just jut out into the surrounding seas. This unique feature has significant implications for Europe's physical geography, its climate, and historical development. Some notable peninsulas found in Europe include the Scandinavian Peninsula, which extends northward into the Arctic Circle, known for its rugged mountains. It's got lots of fjords, expansive forests. It is the largest peninsula in Europe. The Iberian Peninsula, which is down in the southwestern part. It includes Spain and Portugal. It's surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean, Mediterranean Sea. It boasts mountains like the Pyrenees, the fertile plains, and lots of coastal regions. The Italian Peninsula, which is the little boot-shaped country, extends into the Mediterranean Sea. It includes Italy, San Marino, Vatican City. It's got that boot-like shape. It's famous for its rich history, its iconic landmarks, diverse landscapes. And the Balkan Peninsula, which is where you find places like Greece and Bulgaria and Serbia and places like that. It's kind of like triangular. So Albania is part of it, and Macedonia, parts of Romania. It's bordered by the Aegean, the Adriatic Sea, which is this guy in here, the Black Sea over here. It's got mountain ranges. Another one. So there's a lot of smaller peninsulas in this peninsula of peninsulas. Jutland, which is Denmark, Peloponnesus, which is Greece, Crimean Peninsula, which is where you find Ukraine. Well, it's a part of Ukraine. It's this little spit that kind of sticks into the Black Sea. The presence of peninsula has influenced lots of trade, exploration, development of extensive coastal cities and port infrastructure throughout Europe's history. Another thing that's important is the currents. The ocean exerts significant influence on the world's climate, and in particular, Europe. The ocean collects and stores vast amounts of solar energy, particularly from the equatorial area, and transports that heat via currents. Ocean currents can move water for thousands of miles from one temperature zone to another. Because oceans can absorb so much heat, maritime climates are typically more mild than continental ones, and with smaller temperature variations from day to night as well as from winter to summer. The influence is not only the temperature, but also precipitation patterns over a wide region of Europe and the rest of the world. It's important to note that water moderates coastal environments in a number of ways. Water heats and cools more slowly than land. This is what's called heat inertia. It allows coastal communities that have climates that tend to be more moderate. So the difference between day and nighttime temperatures are decreased. The difference between different seasons are also decreased. Interior Europe does not benefit from these coastal waters and can have winters as cold as those found in the upper United States. Again, remember, talking about an area that is predominantly north of 50 degrees latitude. So the Gulf Stream is an important thing to talk about when we talk about Europe. It's perhaps the most influential current for Western Europeans' climate. It's responsible for producing a temperate climate for this northern latitude location. During the last ice age, there was a significant amount of ice kind of over what we call the Canadian Shield. And an ice dam formed, and when that broke open, it created, we'll talk later about this when we talk about the Americas next week, but basically that water dumped into this area here called the Beaufort Sea and out, and literally plunged Europe back into an ice age. So the whole rest of the planet was coming out of the ice age, but because all this cold water came in here and kind of altered the jet stream's path by cooling off the water quickly, Europe continued to have an ice age, I think, for like another 100, 150 years or something like that before the large ice sheets were gone from Europe. So important to note, like, one of the weird things about, I mean, if you really want to talk about how the Gulf Stream really kind of helps out Europe, and is that along the western coast of Scotland, it has a mild enough climate to support like tropical flowers, even though it's clearly as far north as the Hudson Bay in Canada, which is way up in here. So the fact that you can get, you know, tropical flora is because that tropical warm water kind of keeps this area nice and pleasant. You can see that it comes way up here before it circles back down and then comes back. So, so what does it mean to be European? Being European encompasses many dimensions, including geographical and cultural, historic, political. Some key elements are, you know, being European refers to being a resident or having ties to the continent of Europe. It's again delineated by the physical boundaries, such as the Ural Mountains to the east and the Atlantic Ocean to the west, Mediterranean Sea to the south, Arctic Ocean to the north. Europe is renowned for its cultural diversity. It means embracing and being influenced by a multitude of languages, traditions, customs, arts, cuisines. Each country has its own unique cultural heritage, history, and contributions to literature, music, philosophy, art, science. Europeans often share common values and ideals, including democracy, human rights, the rule of law, social welfare, respect for diversity and individual freedoms. This is so like embedded in their institutions that the European Union was able to form and has shaped the development of many European societies. Being European involves recognizing and being shaped by its rich historical legacy from ancient civilization and empires. The Renaissance was here, Enlightenment, the modern era. It has been the cradle of significant historical events, intellectual movements, and scientific advancements. Europeans share a collective historical consciousness and are connected throughout shared historical experiences. The EU plays a significant role in defining European identity. Membership involves participating in a supranational entity that promotes cooperation, integration, and common policies among its member states. It fosters a sense of belonging to a broader European community and facilitates the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital within its borders. If you're not familiar with the European Union, they have the same money system across all the countries in Europe. People, like it says, can move freely. You don't have to you don't have to be like special in order to go from like England to Germany or anything like that. So it's kind of cool. There's a sense of solidarity. It's often like this interdependence. It can be seen in the support provided during times of crisis. So when one country, has a problem, other countries among Europe really kind of help each other out. They join efforts to address common challenges like climate change and security, economic development. It's also important to note that being European is a multifaceted concept, and individual interpretations and identities can vary. It encompasses a sense of belonging to a shared cultural space, which recognizes that interconnectedness of European nations and peoples. If you've been following the news, you know that the British Brexited the EU. So they were part of the EU, and then they were like, no, we don't want to be part of this, because they couldn't, I don't know, I don't want to be, but in my opinion, it was just they didn't want to be a part of that bigger group. They were like, hey, we're British and we want to be British. Forget the rest. And in some instances it kind of makes sense. They got their own thing going on. They're an island, so there's that integration between them isn't as important. In order to get to England, you have to take a boat, or I guess take the train, and so it's a little more complicated than going from Germany to France. It's just I don't know. It's just my opinion as to why. I mean, I'm sure there were plenty of reasons, and we could sit here and debate why they did Brexit. But let's just move on. Click. So we've already really kind of chatted about this geographic identity, the mountains, the plains, the climate. So this is just kind of going back and kind of hitting what does it mean to be European. The diversity. Europe is home to a vast array. Over 200 languages are spoken across the continent. Major language families include Indo-European, which is Germanic and Romance and things like that. European cultural heritage is celebrated throughout its art and architecture. It's been the center for expression for centuries, from the Renaissance masterpieces of Italy and the cathedrals in France and things like that, to Shakespeare and Cervantes and contemporary art movements and stuff like that. They've got a variety of cuisine, from the hearty stews of the Eastern Europeans to the, Mediterranean delight of Italy and Greece, and the cheese in France and the seafood of Scandinavia. It reflects a very diverse amount of climate and local ingredients and things like that. If you're not familiar, there's a lot of cultural diversity. Europe is known for its vibrant festivals and traditions, which, again, depending on where you're talking. So you've got Oktoberfest in Germany, and Carnival in Venice, and lots of midsummer celebrations in Scandinavia, and numerous religious and cultural festivities that highlight the traditions and heritage of a specific region. It's been the birthplace and cradle of several major religions, including Christianity and Islam, Judaism, various pagan beliefs throughout history. It has witnessed the coexistence and interactions of different communities. And so there's lots of different architecture associated with each of these. And it's important to note that there are regional differences because of that diversity, the emphasis of the distinctive characteristics. The North differs from the South, the East from the West, and each region has its own dialects and cultural norms. And whether it's like the laid back lifestyle of the Mediterranean, let's go hang out at the beach kind of thing, or the industriousness of the Northern Europeans, or the folk traditions in Eastern Europe, they contribute to this tapestry, I want to like this vast painting of what's going on in Europe. And it's important to, it's not limited to the examples that I spoke of, or the countries or cities or small communities. They each offer their own kind of unique cultural experience. It's like the difference between cities here in the US. I mean, there's a difference between, California, and even within California, Southern California, Northern California. And so you can kind of see how that, translates, even within the states of the US, let alone if, we were, talking different countries associated with the Americas versus Europe. I mentioned their shared values and ideals. One of the interesting things to know about Europe is that they have a large number of people who speak 3 or more languages, and so it's really kind of interesting, depending on where, so like up here in the Scandinavian countries, you got Norway and Finland and Sweden, and they're speaking 3 or more languages, a lot of them. Democracy is a fundamental value in Europe. Most European countries embrace a democratic rule of government. Europe has a strong commitment to human rights. In fact, the European Convention on Human Rights, established by the Council of Europe, sets a standard for human rights protections and is legally binding for all of its member states, such as freedom of speech, equality, privacy, non-discrimination. The rule of law implies that laws are applied equally to all individuals, ensuring fairness and accountability. Europe places a strong emphasis on social welfare and providing safety net for citizens. Most European countries have well-established social welfare systems that, include like healthcare, access to education, Social Security, other social services, things like that. They're very tolerant of one another. Efforts are made to foster an understanding and cooperation among different cultural groups, promoting like the sense of unity and diversity. Europe has shown a strong commitment to climate change ideas. I like to think that's because they're afraid that, Greenland is going to melt and then they're going to be in an ice age before anybody else. But, that's, again, just my 2 cents. So there's an interesting video I'd like for you to take a look at here. So Europe has been home to significant ancient civilizations: the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Celts were around, the Norse people in the north. If you look a little more recently, you've got the medieval period, the Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Viking era in Scandinavia are among many of the historical developments. The Crusades, the religious wars, the Renaissance and Enlightenment, if you remember that. So we're talking like 14th century Italy. Great intellectual and artistic achievements started happening. This movement spread across Europe, leading to advancements in art and science and literature. And, there was the age of exploration, the 14th and 15th centuries, European expansion, colonialization, trade, European powers like Portugal and England and Spain and France, the Netherlands even got in on, embarking on voyages that allowed them to colonize new lands. And when we talk about Africa, you'll see that impact that he's had, that age of exploration. The Industrial Revolution started here. Both world wars took place in Europe. So there's and the post-war period brought about massive organizations like the UN and the EU, and which both aim to foster peace and cooperation and economic integration. And so I'd like for you to watch this video, which kind of shows you a map of Europe every year. It's got weird music though. Political and economic integrations include like the EU. One of the key achievements of the EU is the establishment of a single market, which allows for the movement of goods and services and capital and even people within the EU. It enables businesses to trade and operate across borders without barriers, which promoted job opportunities. And the Eurozone is a subset of the EU that has adopted the euro as their common currency. 19 of the EU countries are part of the monetary system, which has facilitated trade and economic integration. It would be like, I guess the easiest way to think about it is if you left to California and you went to Nevada and you had to have different money to use at the gambling casino. It's similar to that. That's the way it used to be. And now they have a common like monetary system, so you don't have to like do the exchange rate and the whole thing. Your money is good whether you're in Spain or France or Germany or places like that. That single market system also promotes that sense of solidarity. We're in this together. So this is showing you a map of those countries bound to the single market via agreements and treaties, and a picture of the EU members, which again provides a sense of solidarity. So crisis and social welfare and economic cooperation and things like that. Now, some of the key terms, just for the record, this lecture that I'm doing right now is not intended to be a replacement for the weekly reading, but kind of like a supplement for the topic for the week. So one of the key terms that comes up this week is centrifugal with an F and centripetal with a P. Now, I'm not talking physics, but it works the same way. F, things fall apart. So centrifugal with an F are those that threaten national identity by dividing a state. And P, or centripetal with a P, pull things together. So centripetal forces tend to unify people within a country, kind of pull them together. So let's talk about some of the centripetal forces. Centripetal forces that we've talked about before are like shared identity, infrastructure development, political stability, effective governance. So these are concepts used in geography to describe factors that either promote unity and cohesion or work to divide and fragment. So coming together when there's a common threat or challenge, like a natural disaster or a security concern, creates a sense of unity and cooperation, which kind of pulls Europe together. And centrifugal is those things that kind of drive a wedge between the various countries, or even within a country, various groups. So different linguistic divisions, not being able to deep-rooted ethnic, religious, or linguistic differences lead to division and conflict, which weaken unity. Some of the physical barriers, for example, the Alps, formidable barrier between Europe and Italy, for example, right? So understanding these forces helps geographers look at the dynamics and challenges of a region, including why, what brings it, what creates that unity, what promotes that fragmentation, and where are some potential areas for integration. And examining these, policymakers, stakeholders can work towards mitigating division and strengthening the centripetal forces to foster stability, cooperation, and sustainable development. So one of the things that is emerging in many regions, and a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about right now, we could be saying about what's going on here in North America, but migration patterns. Europe has been prominent in recent years in having a number of migration situations. Particularly, some of the migration things are refugee and asylum seekers. These are people who are fleeing persecution in a variety of humanitarian crises, like what's going on in Syria or Afghanistan or even Iraq, Sub-Saharan Africa. In 2021 alone, there were over 114,000 sea arrivals in Italy, Greece, Spain, Cyprus, and Malta. Just last week, there was a boat that capsized in the Mediterranean Sea, or captured by the Greek government. There's a number of economic migrants, so labor migrants and students. Those are what we call mixed migration flows. So these are a number of people looking for better opportunities. Mixed migration flows present challenges in distinguishing between different migration categories and determining. The term stateless nation comes to mind. A stateless nation refers to an ethnic group or community of people who share a common culture, language, history, and sense of identity, but do not have their own independent state or sovereign territory in which to call their own. So in other words, they lack a place that corresponds to their ethnic identity. And despite not having a formal political entity, these often have aspirations for self-determination and seek to establish their own independent homeland. This week's discussion is about refugees, asylum seekers, human trafficking. So alongside regular migration, there has been an increase in irregular, if I can call it that, migration. This is like smuggling, human trafficking. These are often driven by desperate circumstances in the search for better lives. Addressing these have become priorities in European countries. Here's a map that shows the situation. It reminds me of something I heard recently on the radio related to migration in the US. Someone said something about where asylum can be sought. And they said something like, it's intended to be sought in the first country you come to when you leave your host nation. And a lot of that same thing is going on here in Europe. So if you leave Syria, should you not be seeking asylum in Turkey or Algeria? But looking at this map, it seems that many of the migrants are looking for asylum in Germany, which brings us to the next thing, which is the unequal distribution of migrants. It's not uniform. Certain countries, especially those with stronger economies and historical ties, have received larger numbers of migrants. Countries such as Germany and Sweden, Italy, UK have all been destinations, while others in Eastern Europe have experienced lower numbers, but significant demographic impacts. And then there's, what is the capacity to take in these migrants? And this is a very complex process. It involves various aspects like language acquisition and access to education, employment opportunities, cultural adaptation. And so some of the challenges are, discrimination, unequal opportunities, social tensions. And like I said, we could be saying the same thing here. So another, pattern or debate we could talk about is migration is a highly politicized issue with divergent views and ideologies across Europe. Debates focus on national identity, cultural preservation, cohesion, impact to the economy, security concerns, things like that. And many of the member states disagree on how to deal with the situation. So there's a regulation that looks at processing the asylum claims, and it has faced significant criticism for putting huge burdens on countries of first arrivals. European countries have sought, cooperation with other countries of origin, agreements such as the EU-Turkey statement, and the cooperation with countries in North Africa aim to strengthen border control, combat a lot of the smuggling, and support better development initiatives. So how can we create a place so that these asylum seekers can be safe, and find a place to to be successful. And there are a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and volunteers who have played a crucial role in providing assistance and advocating for the rights of migrants, and promoting this integration, which has helped alleviate the immediate need, and fostered a lot of solidarity and support within the European society. The other part of this week's discussion is about Russia. Russia is the largest country in terms of physical area. It is nearly 2 times the size of the United States. It stretches from the densely populated European side over here, all the way to Siberia and the far eastern side. In these eastern regions, there is a lot of ties with China. As you can see, there's proximity. It's much easier to trade with China and do, things, like that with China than it would be to, trade with, Europe and places like that. There is a railway that connects the eastern side to the western side, which it takes a week of travel to get from one side to the other. Interesting, there are no paved highways that traverse the entire country. Russia showcases world-renowned cities like Moscow, which is known for its wealthy elite, and the iconic Red Square, which is pictured here. Extensive Arctic territories, vast forest in Siberia, and even a thriving grain farms. I was just listening to the radio recently. They were talking about I forget what I want to suggest, commodity pricing, right? In the United States, a large amount of wheat in particular comes, wheat that we consume here in the United States, or rely on it to be there so that we don't have to ship our wheat everywhere, kind of thing. Because of what's going on between Russia and the Ukraine, there's this problem with wheat commodities, and so wheat prices are going up, which means that bread and things like that, the price of bread. And so it's just kind of like a sidebar. To accommodate its vast, expansive size, Europe encompasses 8 time zones, with an additional time zone dedicated to the European enclave of Kaliningrad near Poland. So this is kind of like a little sidebar. The Earth has time zones, which was a way to standardize and regulate time across different regions of the world. They're based on, well, the rotation of the Earth on its axis, which causes day and night, as well as the progression of time. And you should be familiar that it takes, approximately 24 hours to complete a day. So because the Earth is a sphere, different parts of the world experience daylight and darkness at different times. And if there were no time zones, each location would have its own local time. And that's what happened way back, based on where the sun was directly overhead. When the sun was directly overhead, it was called noon. And it was more like noon to you, but noon to you is not the same as if you travel to the next city. And so eventually, mostly due in this, to technological advancements in transportation, particularly train schedules, it became important to have, a set time so that, when you went to the next place, they didn't have a completely different time because it would just mess everything up. So these time zones are typically defined based on lines of longitude. The prime meridian, which runs through Greenwich, England, is the reference point for coordinating the universal time, or Greenwich Mean Time. And from there, the Earth is divided into 24 time zones. So if you take 360 divided by 24, you'll get 15. So 15 degrees of longitude wide, with each time zone differing by 1 hour. They may not always follow, as you can see here. They don't follow, they don't go straight up and down from the top to the bottom, so that countries can have, the same time zone as, areas that they deal with. So in the United States, for example, we have 4 time zones in the main part, and then 1 time zone for Alaska, another one for Hawaii. And so countries or regions may choose to adjust their standard time. So like for us, we have daylight savings time. But interesting thing to note is that China is all on 1 time zone, although they actually cover 6. So they're in this +5, +6, +7, +8, +9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 time zones. If you looked at it by, degrees, right? But so anyways, so in this course, there is a learning outcome that says the 4 regions, but I like to think of Russia like most geographers, and there are actually 5 regions. So, so the first one is the tundra zone. This is found in the northern part of Russia, extending into the Arctic Circle. It's extremely cold, and there's like permafrost, which is permanently frozen ground. Got really short growing season, low growing mosses, lots of lichens, shrubs, things like that. Tree growth is limited due to the harsh climate. It's also home to, things like reindeers and polar bears and, Arctic foxes and things like that. Things you'd find in like the Arctic here in the US, right? And the next region, is the taiga, and it's the largest natural zone in Russia. It's a portion of the country. It stretches from the north over here all the way over to here. It's characterized by taiga. Actually, is it's a forest zone. It's not just in Russia, it's across all of the Arctic, basically. It's a conifer forest, dominant with spruce and fir trees, things that you'd find like in Big Bear. It's got long, cold winters and really short summers, and lots of wolves and bears and moose like you'd find in Big Bear, although you wouldn't find a moose there. Let's go with Montana. You find moose in Montana. So it's a vital source of timber and forest resources, things like that. All right. The next one is what we call the steppe. We have steppe here in the US. Steppe is just a fancy word for plains. So, grasses. So the eastern part of the country extends all the way over to Siberia. It's vast, characterized by lots of fertile soil and semi-arid to continental climate. It's known for grassy plains, vegetation like grasses and herbs and things like that, like you'd find in the Midwest of the United States. It's used for particularly cultivating wheat, other grain. It's home to, nomadic herders and antelopes and things like that, like you'd find, like I said, like in the Midwest. The next zone is the arid zone. Arid just means dry. It's primarily in these regions here. It's dry, it's desert-like, it's got not a lot of vegetation. It's also known for, things like you'd find here in the Mojave. So salt pans and sand dunes and things like that. And of course, you're going to find wildlife, plants, and animals that are uniquely adapted to these particular regions. And then the last zone is the mountain zone. And this includes, the various mountain ranges found throughout Russia, like the Caucasus Mountains and the Altai Mountains and the Ural Mountains. And you got these elevated landscapes. It's characterized by meadows and forests and glaciers, snow-capped peaks and things like that. And so a lot of diversity in flora and fauna here. You also a lot of recreational activities, just like you'd have in our mountains, hiking, skiing, mountaineering. So it's like Lake Tahoe, All right. So as we learned before, regions, it depends on who you ask, right? So if we, sorry, this is the mountains. This is the arid area. Yeah, sorry. Okay. I did that. All right. So another way to look at it, again, we have 5, is looking at these, areas here. So the Ural Mountain area, you've got central Russia, which is the core of Russia, the Siberian Plateau. You've got the Northern Caucasus Range, like over here. So we're looking at, 18,000 foot peaks here. So really tall mountains. Siberia, Siberian Plateau, Lake Baikal, the deepest freshwater lake in the world, is located here. And then the Russian Far East, which is, that area between Siberia and the Pacific Ocean. So this is a very remote area. It's known for, volcanoes and dense forests and coastal areas and lots of biodiversity. Oops. So if I had to say the 4, all right, fine. I'll make it only 4. All right, we'll go with Western Russia. That's the area where most of the people live. So that includes things like Moscow and St. Petersburg. So this is where the vast population area is. Siberia, which is here in the middle. It goes from basically the Ural Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It's extremely cold, huge forest. Includes a lot of, the Siberian Plateau. It's rich in natural resources like oil and gas and minerals and things like that. The next region I'd say is like Northern Russia. That would be the area that, covers, the North Caucasus, the area around the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, things like that. Oh, sorry, that would be Southern Russia. I'm talking about Northern Russia, sorry. The Kamchatka Peninsula. The first thing I probably learned about Russia, because I played the game Risk, and it was like its own separate little place that you had to like battle and win for. Again, long harsh winters, things like that. It's way far north, and so these areas like Alaska experience a lot of darkness, low angles of incoming solar radiation, so it doesn't get super hot or warm or things like that. And then southern, down here by the Caucasus Mountains and areas around the Black and Caspian Sea. So yeah, And all right. If we were to look at like a brief history of Russia, this would be pretty much what you got here. You've got, the indigenous people. So prior to the arrival of what are called the Slavic people, various indigenous populations inhabited the region, like the Finno-Ugric tribes to the northwest, or the Siberian tribes to the east, or the Turks and Mongols, and then you had the Slavic people migrate and settle in the Middle Ages, like, the 9th century. Then you had a period of time where the Mongols, like in the 13th century, were there, like Genghis Khan, should ring a bell. Then there's what they call the rise of Moscow. So during the 14th and 15th century, Moscow like expanded its territory. It kind of absorbed, because that's a good way of describing. Absorbed the center of Russia, became like the center of political and cultural life. And then there was a period of time, a man by the name of Ivan the Terrible became the first Tsar of Russia in the 16th century. And this was marked by a period of like centralization and expansion, including the conquest of many areas. It laid the groundwork for what was to come later, which is the Russian Empire, which expanded throughout the 17th and 18th century, reaching its greatest kind of like height of, I wouldn't say popularity, but more like height of expansion, the height of, I don't know, being in the news, under Peter the Great. And so then there was a period of time called the Siberian expansion in the 16th and 17th centuries, and they started colonizing Siberia. They established outposts, trading posts, fortresses along the rivers, and incorporated a vast, Siberian territory into the Russian Empire. And then you've got this Imperial Russian period, where you get a lot of modernization and industrialization, and again, this is all under Peter the Great and his successors. Peter the Great, I want to say he was like 1700s. And then you have what's called the Soviet era. So from the period of the Russian Revolution in 1917 until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, you had this period of what was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the Russian Soviet Federation, the Russian RSFSR, Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. So the country underwent this rapid industrialization and cultivation and collection of agriculture, and really kind of had this significant territorial changes, and it just grew into this large, vast area it is now. And now we're in what's called the post-Soviet era. So with the dissolution, like I said, of the Soviet Union, after, President Reagan went to, the Berlin Wall essentially and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And so he did. 1991, he didn't. They tore down the wall, and basically that was the end. Russia emerged as an independent country, and the multi-ethnic, diverse country with, again, population concentrated in urban areas, and ranging all the way from the European part to Siberia in the Far East. And it is really kind of shaped, all of this has really kind of shaped the cultural heritage and the geopolitical power and position, economic potential, things like that. So I'd like to watch this little animated video about where Russia came from.
Russia is the largest country on Earth, spanning an incredible 17 million square kilometers. But if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering how it got so big, and how it has become such a powerful political and social entity in our modern world. It not only takes the title of largest and most popular country and city in Europe, but also
all right, so yeah, that's a interesting little tidbit there. All right, so Russian multiculturalism is complex phenomenon. Due to the vast size, it's got a lot of different ethnic groups and historical legacy. It's home to more than 190 ethnic groups, sorry, with Russian forming the majority of the population. However, there are a lot of significant ethnic minorities, including the Tatars and the Ukrainians and the Bashirks and the Chechens and those people who live in Armenia are the Armenians. So lots of different like ethnic groups among this vast behemoth of a landmass. And so
This episode is supported by CuriosityStream. Start watching documentaries and other non-fiction titles at curiositystream.com/SUIBHNE and use the code Sweeney for 1 month free. And by the patrons who chose today's topic. Sign up at Patreon to vote for the next country. In the city of Brussels, German philosopher Karl Marx and his collaborator Friedrich Engels penned the Communist Manifesto, a book espousing a radical form of socialism which spoke of utopia and a revolutionary overthrow of the capitalist bourgeoisie. The same year, the revolutions of 1848 erupted in France, the German Confederation, Poland, and the Italian peninsula. Although these revolutions would be quelled, change was in the air. It had been more than a century since Russia had been invaded by Napoleon, and now in 1917 the powerful German Empire had captured Poland, Belarus, and Lithuania. The Russian people were starving in the streets, and soon the capital was in revolution. First in the February overthrow of the monarchy, but later in October, the more infamous takeover by Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks, sparking the Russian Civil War. One of the deadliest civil wars in human history, its casualties outnumbered even those of the First World War. The war was broadly divided into the Reds, the Bolsheviks, and the White Movement, a loosely organized alliance of anti-Bolsheviks, anarchists, foreign powers, and civilian militias. The war was devastating. The biggest killer was starvation. The Soviets, a Russian word for workers' union, surrendered to Germany in 1918, and the Reds and the Whites committed numerous mass killings of one another in the Red and White Terror respectively, including the Bolsheviks' brutal murder of the Russian royal family in their Yekaterinburg homestead. The Reds soundly defeated the Whites after Leon Trotsky forced conscription, and the Western Allies began withdrawing troops at the conclusion of the Great War. Lenin planned on expanding the revolution to Europe, but was handed a crushing defeat by the Poles at the Battle of Warsaw, which saw that Bolshevism would be contained to the former Russian Empire. Separate Soviet republics were formed in their territory and united to form the USSR. When Lenin died, a young radical criminal with the Communist Party took power, Joseph Stalin. Civil wars rarely breed a stable and united society, and the USSR was no different. To secure their grip on power, the NKVD, or Soviet Secret Police, was formed, rounding up and executing thousands of anti-revolutionaries. The Gulag was established, the infamous Siberian concentration camps, where millions would eventually be worked to death. The USSR was now a totalitarian one-party state. Stalin is considered by many to be the most evil man in history, a paranoid and cruel tyrannical narcissist who surrounded himself with those loyal to him. He instituted radical reforms to transform Russia into an industrial power, causing a man-made famine in Ukraine, southern Russia, and Kazakhstan, which killed millions. He rounded up and executed members of the Communist Party, wealthy oligarchs, and the Red Army, and executed them in the Great Purge. Millions of political prisoners were executed or sent to the Gulag. He made an alliance with Adolf Hitler, dividing Europe between their spheres of influence, and together the two tyrannical warmongers invaded Poland in 1939, beginning the Second World War. The Soviets narrowly escaped war with Britain and France, who condemned the invasion because their treaty with Poland only required action in the case of German aggression, not Soviet. Free from their interference, the Soviets invaded Finland, but due to Stalin's purges, the invasion was a stunning failure. So they settled instead to annex the Baltic states and Moldova, while committing atrocities in Poland, such as the Katyn massacre, which they later blamed on the Nazis. Events took a sharp turn when Hitler betrayed his Russian ally and invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, and so began the 4-year-long conflict that would see the capture of millions of POWs, the starvation of millions of Soviet citizens, and the deportation of millions more communist officials and Jews to concentration camps. By some estimates, nearly half of the USSR's 4.8 million Jewish people lost their lives, most of them living in the Russian shtetl. The death toll was aggravated by Stalin's refusal to evacuate cities, thinking that the Red Army would fight harder to protect their homes, such as in Leningrad where hundreds of thousands starved in the 3-year-long siege, and how Russian tanks were sent into battle half-built, and how in Stalingrad, the largest battle in history, logistical failures meant that soldiers often went into battle with unloaded rifles, and those deserting the front line were shot by their own comrades. Stalingrad was, however, the turning point of the war, and a point of pride for the Soviet people, managing to surround the overextended and unarmored German army, ensuring the Wehrmacht would advance no further. The Red Army soon launched a large-scale counteroffensive, pushing back the overextended Wehrmacht the next 2 years. Their progress was so quick that it looked like the Soviet Union was going to defeat Nazi Germany single-handedly, as Allied operations up until now had focused on North Africa and Italy. In fact, the Red Army had on their own pushed back the Wehrmacht a massive 1,600 kilometers of captured territory to the border of the German Reich, before the Allies had even opened a second front at Normandy. It was a triumphant moment for the young and poor nation, winning the war on sheer grit and manpower. However, the term winning is probably not the right word, as they had lost between 20 and 30 million people in the war, more than any other nation. At the conclusion of the war, the Allies and the Soviets became enemies once more, with Stalin's reluctance to leave occupied Eastern Europe, choosing instead to set up Soviet-friendly governments in all captured territory. Soviet territory even extended back to Stalin's original deal with Hitler, and when a metaphorical Iron Curtain descended across Europe, the Cold War began. The Cold War deserves a video of its own, but suffice it to say that it would change the world forever. How did Tsarist Russia become such a hotbed of revolutionaries in the first place? From the reforms of Peter the Great to the wise rule of Empress Catherine, perhaps no less a destabilizing factor in Russia's history came with Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Russia. In the 2-part series, Napoleon the Invasion of Russia, you can learn about this event. It covers the last great conflict to touch Russia in the century before the Great War, and the social and economic factors that resulted from the French Revolution. I highly recommend this documentary for a more in-depth look at Russian history, which you can watch for free over at CuriosityStream, a great place to watch amazingly well-produced documentaries and other non-fiction content. Simply use the URL curiositystream.com/Sweeney for a 31-day free trial to watch this or any other show you'd be interested in, including history, technology, science, and so much more. Give the site a visit and start watching amazing documentaries today. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter for any updates and consider supporting a Patreon. Until next time.
So I think it's important that I know we live in a Cold War, end of the Cold War era, but I grew up towards the tail end of the Cold War era, where we still had bomb drills, like, duck and cover drills, where they tell you to, this bell rings, go sit away from the windows and put your hands behind your head and tuck your head into your knees. And I was like, but it's a nuclear bomb. Won't it like vaporize us all? I mean, what is ducking my head and sitting on an interior wall going to do? But so I want you to understand a little bit about what the Cold War was.
From the end of World War II, the United States and its Western European allies were involved in a nearly half-century-long titanic struggle with the Soviet Union, known as the Cold War. It was cold only in the sense that the Russians and Americans never came to direct blows, but it was certainly not cold for the Cubans, Koreans, Vietnamese, and others who got caught up in the communists' relentless drive to destabilize the free, democratic, capitalist world. There were, to be sure, many morally complex moments during this long struggle, but the Cold War was, at its core, as clear a conflict of good versus evil as World War II had been. Just like that war, the Cold War was a death match between the forces representing freedom and the forces representing totalitarianism. Because hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, died in it, the Cold War can, with good reason, be described as the Third World War. The instigator of this war was Joseph Stalin, the mass-murdering dictator of Russia and of the many non-Russian peoples he had incorporated into what was known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Soviet Union for short. Stalin knew that his Soviet armed forces could not take on the might of the Free West. Instead, he decided to wage this fight through the use of proxies, and by a massive use of disinformation and misinformation. His initial prey was Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia, as well as Poland, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria and Czechoslovakia. Stalin had troops in all these countries at the end of the war. Despite what he promised American President Franklin Roosevelt at the Yalta Conference, the Soviet leader had no intention of removing them, and gaining control over their governments proved to be quite easy. In March 1946, Winston Churchill famously declared that from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. When Stalin threatened both Greece and Turkey, President Harry Truman finally had enough. The so-called Truman Doctrine was born. The United States and its allies would not permit any further expansion of the communist empire. The Cold War was on. For the next 5 decades and across 4 continents, Europe, Africa, Asia and South America, the US and the Soviet Union battled for influence, sometimes overtly, like in Korea and Vietnam, and sometimes covertly through their various spy agencies. But the moral lines of this battle never changed. The freedom of the West versus the communist tyranny of the Soviet East. There are, nonetheless, as there were even at the time, those who argue that the Cold War was an overreaction by the West, that the ambitions and strength of the Soviet bloc were greatly exaggerated, and that America, with its massive defence build-up, was just as responsible for the Cold War as was the Soviet Union. But this simply isn't true, as an immense amount of archival evidence from Russia, not available until after the Cold War ended, now proves. Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor, stated Soviet intentions plainly in 1956. "We will bury you," he told the West. Nor would any amount of negotiation, détente as it was called then, have led to a just conclusion of the war. The American diplomat George Kennan rightly warned that short of becoming a communist country, there was nothing the United States could do to gain the Kremlin's trust. The Soviets could not be appeased, only contained. But even containment was an inadequate strategy. Yes, the Soviet Union could not have beaten the US in a head-to-head confrontation, but it didn't have to. Victory in the Cold War would have allowed it, through intimidation and subversion, to dominate the globe, making communism, rather than democracy and capitalism, the preeminent ideology. There were many times during the 5 decades of the war that it seemed like this would be the case. But thanks primarily to the strong leadership shown by Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Pope John Paul II, the Cold War ended not with a bang, but a whimper. The Soviet Union was, at the close of the 1980s, to use historian Paul Johnson's description, a bewildered giant, economically bereft, militarily exhausted, no longer able or willing to enforce its will. Communism had failed in every possible way, economically, politically, morally. It had tried to create a utopia on Earth and instead created hell for all of the nations that came under its sway. Yes, the forces of liberty eventually won the Cold War, but this triumph offers little consolation to millions who died or suffered needlessly through no fault of their own for a never viable and now badly discredited cause. I'm Andrew Roberts for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To help keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
All right. So again, in 1991, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, breaks apart. 14 ethnic regions create new states or countries. They're still going on. A lot of political and economic reforms. They started in the 80s under the leadership of Gorbachev. He implemented a number of economic reforms known as perestroika, which is just a restructuring, and glasnost, which was the openness, come join us, everyone, which aimed to kind of revitalize the Soviet system, but it also led to an increase in openness socially and politically, which brought to the surface a number of long-standing issues that various ethnic and area groups had. And so during this kind of period of time, there was a large upwelling of nationalism, and particularly because I'd say because really its size, the sentiment grew in many of these various republics, is the best word I can think of to use, which really kind of called upon, like they go, hey Lisa, why don't you take over this? And you're like, I've never done this before. And they're like, oh, that's okay, you'll be fine. And you're like, sure, I will. Okay. So, kind of like this self-determination, this sovereignty, each of these areas wanted to. So this map kind of shows you a little flag of each of these countries, and then where particular ethnic groups really kind of dominated or existed and things like that, and then what countries turned into what. So number 6, for example, is Ukraine, which is all over the news right now because the Russians have invaded the Ukraine again. And so if you're interested in that, you should really kind of take some time to Google and sit down, like, why, maybe ask ChatGPT or something, why is Russia invading the Ukraine, kind of thing. So you can know a little bit more about it. So I would be remiss, to let you think that the only problems in Russia are political. They have a number of environmental problems that pose significant challenges to the ecosystem and natural resources and public health and things like that. And so some key environmental issues, of course, are industrial impacts of pollution, contamination of rivers and lakes. I could be saying the same thing about what's going on here in the US, right? Deforestation, yeah, that's happening here. Biodiversity loss, yeah, that's happening here. Contamination in the nuclear legacy. Russia had a significant nuclear legacy. It'd be like, telling us here in the United States, we're getting rid of all, bombs for this until we can come up with a better, like way to do this. But so this contamination, this nuclear legacy, with lots of power plants, nuclear power plants, and historical impacts of the testing and the accidents, and this, like, I'm thinking Chernobyl, right? Like that they just kind of like walked away. They didn't really kind of clean it up. They just kind of locked the gate and went the other direction. So Russia is highly vulnerable to climate change, especially in the Arctic region, which is experiencing some of the most rapid changes globally. Russia is one of the world's largest greenhouse gas emitters, primarily due to its heavy reliance on fossil fuels. For as bad as we are, we do have countries, I'm going to go with countries, that don't do it quite as well. Water management, Russia faces a number of challenges. I feel like I could be saying this about California. Pollution and wastewater treatment and overuse of water for irrigation and industrial purposes rather than for what the humans need. So it's very similar. Talking about Europe reminds me a lot of what I read in the newspaper on the daily. So let's see. I know y'all want to know army and military comparison, the EU versus Russia.
The European Union is presently an economic powerhouse consisting of 28 countries with a combined GDP of nearly $19 trillion. About 1.5% of that amount is spent on its defense, totaling a whopping $226 billion. This massive number is still substantially smaller than the $664 billion the United States spends on defense. But it's Russia we'll be focusing on today, the world's second largest military. With a GDP of $1.9 trillion, Russia spends $47 billion on its defense budget. Our question today is, how would the EU with its 28 different countries fare if it went up against the well-equipped, military-minded country of Russia? Let's take a look at this hypothetical matchup in this episode of the infographic show, the European Union versus Russia. This episode was made possible thanks to our wonderful friends at Easily. Give Easily a try for creating amazing infographics. It's easy and free. The first thing we should point out is that while Russia is indisputably the world's most powerful military behind the US, the UK, France, Germany, and Italy are all considered military powerhouses in themselves, and each country is a European Union member. The UK may have just Brexited, but the divorce from the EU won't be final until March 2019. Right now, the EU has a population of 508 million people, 1.4 million of whom are active military personnel. It also has another 1.7 million people acting as reserves. In terms of manpower, Russia isn't far behind. While its population is a shade of the EU's at 143 million, 2.5 million of Russia's citizens are reserve personnel, with 766,000 currently signed up for active military service. As far as weaponry is concerned, we should broach the not-so-pleasant subject of an all-out nuclear war and the all-but-assured ensuing apocalypse. In the case of such a disaster, Russia is the bigger foe, with a huge arsenal of nuclear weapons. It's also worth pointing out that the US is an ally of Europe, and it has an even bigger arsenal of these megabombs. If we get down to the numbers, Russia reportedly has 1,920 deployed warheads, meaning the missiles are good to go. It has another 5,380 warheads waiting in the wings or ready for dismantlement. The EU has a very small slice of the nuclear pie, with the UK and France being the only proprietors of nuclear weapons in Europe. The UK has 160 deployed warheads, 65 in reserve, while France has 290 deployed warheads and 10 in reserve. All the nukes in the world couldn't destroy humanity through blast force alone, but millions could die, certainly decimating the populations of Europe and Russia. It's thought the biggest of nuclear bombs, Russia's Tsar Bomba, if dropped on a densely populated city such as New York, could kill as many as 7.6 million people on impact. But if Russia and the EU did get into a nuclear war, the eventual radiation fallout and blocking out of the sun would cause massive illness and death, and also ecosystem destruction. Russia versus Europe nuclear war ends in a draw. Both sides lose. On a lighter note, Let's have a look at both sides' less destructive weapons. In terms of land weapons, the EU has 6,700 tanks, 48,971 armored fighting vehicles, 2,312 self-propelled guns, 3,492 towed artillery, and 1,069 multiple launch rocket systems. Russia has some supremacy here with its 15,400 tanks, 31,300 AFVs, 5,972 SPGs, 4,625 towed artillery, and 3,793 MLRSs. Who has the best tank is a debate in itself, but here each side holds up pretty well. Russia mounts a serious challenge with its T-90S and its new super tank, the next generation T-14 Armata. Europe is no slouch though when it comes to tanks. Highly rated in the best of these armored beasts list is Germany's Army Leopard 2A5, the UK's Challenger 2, and France's Leclerc. In the air, again there's compelling evidence that each side would hold its own if a war should break out. Russia has 3,100 aircraft, including its deadly multi-role fighter, the Sukhoi Su-35, as well as its interceptor, the MiG-31. Europe has a much bigger air force with 6,751 aircraft and a handful of leading fighter jets. The EU's ace in the hand here is probably the Eurofighter Typhoon, a feat of engineering that was a collaborative effort from UK, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. France's Omnirole jet fighter, the Dassault Rafale, is also highly rated. While Britannia Great Britain may have boasted throughout late history that it rules the waves, that may not be the case these days. Britain's Royal Navy is said to be one of the best, but it's still thought to be less powerful than the Russian Navy. Combining Europe, though, makes all the difference, not only in engineering skills but also sheer numbers. The EU has a total of 61 submarines, 102 frigates, 21 destroyers, 39 corvettes, 167 mine warfare craft, 210 patrol craft, and 4 aircraft carriers. Russia has a total of 60 submarines, 4 frigates, 15 destroyers, 81 corvettes, 45 mine warfare craft, 14 patrol craft, and only 1 aircraft carrier. If we reflect on those numbers, we might come to the conclusion that indeed Britannia no longer rules the waves, but the EU could certainly challenge any superpower in the sea. To power these massive militaries takes a lot of oil, certainly if the war was a protracted one. Here the EU is lacking as it only produces about 1.7 million barrels of oil a day while consuming much more than that amount. It's also got around 5.6 billion barrels of oil in reserve. Russia significantly has the upper hand, producing 10 million barrels daily and consuming only 3.3 million barrels a day. It has a huge 80 billion barrel oil reserve. There's little doubt, however, that if this hypothetical war did happen, the world's largest military, the USA, would have the back of the EU. This would change matters considerably. There is also the issue of each country's technological capabilities. Throughout 2 world wars, Germany and the UK developed a technology which sparked the computer age. Europe and its allies are currently developing automatized military systems, complex spying technologies, drone technology, and perhaps not too far from now, soldiers of war that are not human, but robots. We can presently assume that the EU, with the US on side, is ahead in terms of computer technology, but Russia, possibly with China on side, would not be too far behind. As has been demonstrated in numerous documentaries, the Internet of Things could change how wars are fought. Weapons with machine learning artificial intelligence may also change the landscape of destruction. At the same time, if you can hack a nuclear missile launching system, it's probably game over for the other side. As for allies, Russia doesn't have too many. It's been said Russia has only a handful of allies and nothing compared to the friendships the EU could call upon in times of need. Other things to consider might be military experience, of which the EU could be said to have the upper hand as a collective. Nonetheless, being a collective could pose its own kind of communication problems and disagreements. Russia will never fall out with itself, while most of Europe has a history of squabbling. After hearing this matchup, who would your money be on if the EU went head-to-head with the mighty Russia? Let us know in the comments. And if you like these types of comparisons, be sure to watch our other video entitled Russia versus the United States. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, please consider heading over to our Patreon. We are currently raising money to hire more writers so that we can continue bringing you this bi-weekly show.
All right. So I pulled these articles from, I guess, last week. So relatives search for loved ones, a Greek migrant boat. This week's discussion, as I said, is about, you're going to watch a documentary that was nominated for the best documentary short. And so if you need more kind of leverage when making your discussion available, there's some really great stuff in that particular migrant one, the first one. You should know that, you know, Ukraine and Russia are still butting heads. There was a dam that collapsed. Part of that was related to the war effort. That's also not just Pride Month here, Pride across the nation, across the planet. So the Polish LGBTQ crowds march to demand equal rights, as they should. There was a weird earthquake that happened in France, and oh, this was a cool one. Here, I'm going to show you some lands that climb the big house. So, so across the island of Ireland, after the country was kind of like partitioned into, various areas, the thing that's in decline are these sprawling tenant farmers. And so I was like, that's interesting. What do you mean Ireland's land acts and the decline of the big house? I don't know what I was thinking when I read the big house, but the fact that people don't want to live in a big house anymore. And every time I drive by like a new condo complex, I'm like, people don't want to live in big houses anymore. I don't understand. So, all right. So lots of cool stuff going on in the news this week. Just, kind of check it out. There's no assignment associated with it. Just, I'm hoping you'll take a look and then let me know what you think. All right. So that is the end of our presentation this week. Y'all have a good week, and I'll be in touch, and hopefully you know how to get in touch with me. Just shoot me an email. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.